My name is Atheris, or it was. I'm not certain the word name has meaning anymore when there is no one left to speak it, no cultural context to give it weight, no ancestors to remember why my father chose those syllables. I float in the darkness of a dying wraith ship, my physical form locked in a pilot's cradle that no longer receives commands from a craftworld that no longer exists. Around me, the infinity circuit, the great psychic repository that was supposed to hold the souls of my people for eternity, is silent, not quiet. Silence implies the possibility of sound returning. This is absence. This is the void where millions of voices once sang. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what happens when your consciousness has been unanchored from Xenia time, when the psychic network that oriented your species' perception of reality has been consumed. Let me try to tell you how it happened. How I watched an entire craftworld die in 6 hours. How I felt millions of souls, not just murdered, but erased, as if they had never existed at all. Let me tell you about the day the silence came. My name is Atheris Sunweaver, and I am 27 years old by the count my people use. Approximately 140 Terran Standard years, though we don't measure time the way the younger races do. I was born aboard Craftworld Malantai, 3rd generation of the Sunweaver lineage, trained as a Voidwalker, one of those who pilot the small atmospheric craft that tend to the Craftworld's exterior surfaces, repairing the wraithbone structures that form our world ship's skin. I am tall even for my kind, my frame narrow and angular in the way the humans call alien when they bother to see us as anything other than targets. My hair is the color of starlight, not white, not silver, but something that seems to shift depending on the angle of observation, and I keep it bound in the traditional 4-strand braid of my craft guild. My eyes are amber with flecks of green, and I have a small scar along my left cheekbone from a training accident when I was an adolescent, a rare mark of imperfection that my brother used to tease me about. My brother, Kelman, 2 years my senior, a guardian of the war host, proud and fierce in the way our people value controlled passion. I can see his face still in this moment before everything ended. Sharp features, darker hair than mine, eyes that were pure green like the forests of the maiden worlds we tended. He would visit me between deployments, bringing tales of border conflicts with the barbaric orcs. And we would sit in the Garden of Ascending Thoughts, watching the psychic fountains create sculptures of light while we ate sweet crystallized fruits and talked about nothing important. My father, Therion Sunweaver, served as a bone singers, one of those who could shape wraithbone with psychic talent, literally singing the psychoplastic material into structural forms. He was a master of his craft, his work adorning the Hall of Eternal Memory. When I was a child, he would take me to the workshops and let me watch as he hummed melodies that made the walls grow, that encouraged the living bone of our craft world to heal and strengthen. He smelled of ozone and something sweet, like honey mixed with copper, the scent of active psychic manipulation. All of this, he told me once, gesturing to the curving organic architecture around us, is alive, Atheris. The craft world isn't a ship. It's an extension of us, and we are extensions of it. Never forget, we are never alone. The infinity circuit connects us all, every ancestor, every generation, singing together. We all did. That was the foundation of our existence, the knowledge that death was not an ending, but a transformation. When an Eldar's physical form failed, their soul stone, the psychic gem each of us wore, would be retrieved and integrated into the infinity circuit, the vast crystalline network that ran through every structure of the craft world. There, the consciousness would join with all who came before, a great chorus of collective wisdom and memory. Millions of souls, tens of millions, the accumulated existence of Craftworld Malantai stretching back 10,000 Terran years. We were never alone. That's what they told us. That's what the Farseers, our Psyker leaders, preached. That's what I felt every day, a gentle background hum of presence, like hearing distant music through walls, knowing that just beyond the threshold of my individual perception, My ancestors watched and guided and existed. It was beautiful. It was the core of our civilization. It was a lie. Not because the infinity circuit wasn't real. It was. It functioned. It stored the psychic imprints of the dead. But because we believed it made us safe. We believed it made us eternal. We believed that as long as the circuit endured, we could never truly die. We were wrong. The day it happened, I was performing routine maintenance on the Craftworld's dorsal surface, 17 kilometers from the nearest inhabited district. My craft, a small single-pilot skimmer we call a Firefly, was tethered to a repair platform where I was inspecting a section of wraithbone hull that had shown minor stress fractures during the previous cycle's diagnostic sweep. The work was meditative. I had been doing it for 2 decades. My hands moved through the rituals of examination, running sensor gloves along the smooth bone surface, feeling for inconsistencies in the psychic resonance, marking locations where my father or one of his fellow bone singers would need to apply corrective shaping. The smell was familiar, the slightly sweet organic scent of healthy wraithbone, mixed with the cold metallic tang of the void beyond our atmospheric envelope. My breathing was steady in the enclosed environment suit, the gentle hiss of recycled air, a rhythm I barely noticed. I was thinking about nothing important, whether I should visit the garden again, whether Kelmon would return from his patrol soon, whether the meal I had prepared that morning, a delicate arrangement of algae-derived proteins synthesized to mimic the taste of pre-fall vegetation, had been properly stored or would need to be discarded. Mundane thoughts. Human thoughts, in the sense that any conscious being thinks them. I had no idea I was experiencing the last moment of normal existence I would ever know. The senses detected it first. A ripple in the infinity circuit. Not the gentle, constant flow I'd lived with all my life, but a disruption, like a stone thrown into still water. But wrong, inverted, as if something was pulling the water toward the impact point instead of radiating outward. I paused in my work, one hand still pressed against the wraithbone surface, and felt it through the connection all Eldar maintain with the Craftworld's psychic infrastructure. Something was drinking. That's the only way I can describe it. Imagine feeling a presence at the edge of your consciousness, and that presence has opened a mouth wider than comprehension and begun to swallow. Not eating, not consuming through any physical process, simply pulling reality into itself with the inevitability of a gravitational collapse. My first thought, laughable now, was that perhaps a Farseer was conducting some ritual I hadn't been informed about. The great psychers of our people sometimes performed elaborate workings that created strange sensations in the circuit. Then the screaming started. Not audible screaming, psychic screaming. The sound, if sound is even the right word, of souls in agony transmitted through the infinity circuit itself, so that every living Eldar connected to the network felt the death of those who were dying. I staggered, my hand slipping from the wraithbone, my vision fragmenting into overlapping images. The hull surface before me, and simultaneously, a corridor 17 kilometers away where Eldar were collapsing, their soul stones flaring with light as something pulled at them. Ancestors preserve, I began, invoking the traditional phrase we'd been taught since childhood, the cultural reflex to call upon those who came before. The ancestors didn't answer. They were screaming too. Emergency transmissions flooded every channel simultaneously, the psychic network and the technological communication systems both erupting with panic. Breach in the tertiary biodome. Not orcs, not chaos, something else. Tyrannid organism detected. It's feeding on the circuit, it's feeding on the circuit. Tyrannids. The name meant little to me beyond abstract threat assessments. The Great Devourer, the hive fleets, the extragalactic swarms that consumed all biomass in their path. We had heard reports of their movements in neighboring sectors, but Melantai was far from their projected vectors. Our Farseers had assured the population we were safe. The Farseers were currently dying, their psychically active minds burning like beacons as something targeted them first. I abandoned my workstation, sprinting back to my Firefly. my hands shaking as I initiated the launch sequence. The small craft hummed to life, its wraithbone frame resonating with the same distressed frequency that was now vibrating through the entire Craftworld. Atheris Sunweaver, requesting emergency vector to the tertiary biodome. I transmitted, my voice steadier than I felt. I can provide aerial reconnaissance. Negative. The response was from Guardian Captain Theron, his voice ragged with something I'd never heard from military leadership before. Absolute terror. All civilians are to evacuate to core districts immediately. Do not approach the breach. Repeat, do not. The transmission cut off mid-word. Not interrupted. Cut off. As if the consciousness transmitting had simply ceased to exist in the middle of forming a syllable. I felt it happen through the circuit. Felt Captain Theron's presence, a presence I'd known my entire life. A fixture of the Craftworld psychic landscape as constant as architecture. Simply vanish. Not die in the sense of transitioning to the infinity circuit. Vanish, erased, as if he had never been. And he wasn't alone. I changed course, pulling my Firefly into a high-altitude arc that would give me visual range of the tertiary biodome. Military discipline was breaking down across all channels. Contradictory orders, screams, prayers to ancestors who weren't responding because they were screaming themselves. The biodome came into view, and I saw it. The creature was approximately 40 meters tall, its form unlike any tyrannid bioform in the tactical briefings I'd studied. It was composed of layered carapace plates that shifted through colors the Eldar eye could see, but human vision would miss, ultraviolet and infrared spectrums bending around a central mass that seemed to drink light itself. But it wasn't the physical form that mattered. It was what the creature was doing. Tendrils. Not physical tendrils, but psychic projections visible only in the warp sight all Eldar possess, extended from the creature's form into the wraithbone structure itself, into the infinity circuit. And the circuit was flowing toward it, like water spiraling down a drain. The souls of the dead were being consumed, not killed, not destroyed in battle. Consumed, digested, erased from existence. I watched as one of the tendrils brushed against a node in the circuit that I knew contained the consciousness imprints of the Sunweaver lineage, my ancestors. 17 generations of my family line, their accumulated wisdom and memory stored in that crystalline structure. The tendril touched the node. The souls screamed, and then they were gone. My father's voice, which I'd heard in dreams and meditations since his physical death 3 years prior, which had guided me through difficult repairs and offered comfort in lonely moments. Gone. Not silent. Gone. Erased so completely that I couldn't remember what it had sounded like. I tried to call up the memory of his voice, the way he sang to the wraithbone, the stories he told. Blank. Void. As if I'd never had a father at all. No. Worse. I knew I'd had a father. I knew his name was Therion, but everything else, the experiences, the moments, the accumulated relationship of decades, eaten, digested, deleted from reality itself. All hands. This is Autark Corinth. The transmission cut through the chaos with artificial calm. The enemy is a unique tyrannid organism, designation unknown. It is psychically feeding on the infinity circuit. All military assets are to converge on tertiary biodome. We must kill this creature before. The Autark's transmission became a scream. I was far enough away that I didn't see what happened to him physically. But through the circuit, I felt it. Felt the creature's attention turn toward the Autark's powerful psychic presence. Felt the tendril extend. Felt the moment of contact. Felt him trying to fight. Felt his consciousness being pulled from his body while he was still alive, his soul stone flaring desperately as it attempted to contain his essence, failing, cracking, shattering. Felt him dissolve, not into component parts, but into nothing, existence to non-existence, being to unbeing. The infinity circuit was a network, every Eldar connected to it constantly, a low-level psychic communion that provided orientation, connection, identity. We navigated by it, we dreamed through it. We knew ourselves in relation to it. Now it was a transmission medium for annihilation. Every soul the creature consumed, I felt. Every ancestor erased, every consciousness deleted. The sensation rippled through the circuit to every living Eldar still connected to it. Thousands dying, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. We couldn't disconnect. The circuit was part of us. Disconnecting from it would be like trying to disconnect from our own neurology, our own blood circulation. We were Eldar. We were of the circuit. And through the circuit, we experienced our own extinction in real time. I watched from altitude as the military forces converged. Guardian squads in their crimson armor, aspect warriors, howling banshees, dark reapers, each shrine mobilizing with desperate speed. Warwalkers and wraith lords, the animated wraithbone constructs powered by the souls of dead warriors, marching toward the breach. They died in waves. The creature didn't fight like the brutish orcs or the chaotic demons we trained against. It simply absorbed. Shuriken fire ricocheted off its carapace. Bright lances carved molten furrows that healed instantly. Psychic attacks, usually our greatest strength, seemed to feed it. Every Eldar that died within its range had their soul consumed before it could reach their soul stone. I watched warriors fall and tried to feel for their presence in the circuit, tried to sense them making the transition to ancestral existence. They weren't there. The creature ate them mid-transition, caught them between life and death and digested them. The Wraith Lords fared no better. These constructs were animated by the souls of ancient heroes, volunteers who chose to inhabit mechanical forms to continue protecting the Craftworld after physical death. The creature's tendrils wrapped around them, and I watched as the soul stones embedded in their chest cavities flared, flickered, and went dark. Permanent death. True death. The souls that had existed for centuries, erased in seconds. One of those Wraith Lords was piloted by the consciousness of ancient Merethes, a hero from before I was born, a legend whose stories were told to children. I'd grown up hearing about his deeds. I'd prayed to his memory in moments of fear. I felt him die his final death. I felt the part of my childhood that believed in heroes die with him. The military channels were degrading into chaos. Chain of command was collapsing as officers died faster than replacements could be designated. Individual squad leaders were making desperate last stands, knowing they were achieving nothing, buying no time, saving no one. I was still circling in my firefly, useful for nothing, bearing witness to extinction. Then I heard his voice, Sunweaver's lance, advancing on the creature's dorsal approach. Kelmon, my brother. Leading his guardian squad in what had to be a suicidal charge. Kelmon, I screamed into the communication channel, abandoning protocol. Pull back. You can't. Atheris. His voice actually sounded surprised, almost amused. Little brother, what are you doing on a military channel? You should be in the evacuation. There is no evacuation, I was crying now, tears streaming down my face inside my helmet. It's eating the circuit. It's eating everything. You can't kill it. You have to run. You have to... I'm a guardian, Atheris. His voice was gentle. This is what I trained for. If we can't stop it here, it will consume the core districts. Father's workshop is there. The garden where we used to... Father is gone, I screamed. The ancestors are gone. The creature already consumed the Sunweaver node. Father isn't in the circuit anymore. He's gone. Kelmon. He never existed. We never had a father. Silence on the channel. Long enough that I thought the connection had cut out. Then, what? His voice was small, childlike. The voice of a little boy who'd just been told everything he believed was a lie. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. But you have to run. Please, Kelmon. Please run. His voice was shaking. I can't remember his face. Atheris, I can't remember Father's face. I know I had a father. I know his name was Therion. But I can't, not because it was louder than the others, because I recognized it. Because it was my brother. I dove the firefly toward the battle, abandoning altitude, abandoning safety, abandoning rationality. Some desperate animal part of my brain believed I could do something, save him somehow, pull him from the creature's grasp. I was 300 meters away when I saw him. Kelmon's squad had reached close range. The creature's physical form had sprouted barbed limbs that were eviscerating guardians with mechanical efficiency, their bodies torn apart and consumed by smaller organisms that scuttled from the main mass. But the physical deaths were almost merciful compared to what the psychic tendrils did. One had wrapped around Kelmon. He was still alive, still standing. His shuriken catapult hung loose in his hands as he stared upward at the creature with an expression of absolute incomprehension. The tendril was inside him. I could see it with my warp sight, a pseudopod of psychic hunger that had penetrated his soul stone and was drinking him, not quickly, slowly, deliberately. I watched my brother's life play backward, watched memories flicker across his face as they were consumed in reverse chronological order. The expression changed, regressed, became younger and younger as decades of accumulated experience were eaten away. He died at the age of 5 years old, psychologically speaking. His face held the confused innocence of a child as the last of his consciousness was pulled from his body and dissolved. His corpse remained standing for 3 full seconds before it collapsed. I was screaming. I don't remember what I was screaming. Probably his name, probably curses, probably prayers to ancestors who no longer existed. The creature's main consciousness noticed me. I felt its attention turn, felt the psychic weight of its gaze, not malevolent, not cruel, hungry, simply vastly hungry, the way a human might notice a grain of rice on their plate. Insignificant, but edible. A tendril began extending toward my firefly. I ran. I fled through the Craftworld's interior corridors, my firefly navigating on autopilot while my consciousness fragmented across the dying infinity circuit. The creature hadn't pursued me directly. Why would it? I was a single mote of consciousness when it was feasting on millions. But its presence expanded through the circuit like poison through veins, and there was nowhere to hide from something that existed in the same psychic space as your own thoughts. The evacuation districts were chaos incarnate. I docked at a tertiary hangar and stumbled from my craft, my legs barely supporting me. The hangar was packed with Eldar, hundreds, thousands, all trying to reach the evacuation ship simultaneously. But there was nowhere to evacuate to. The creature wasn't an invading army you could flee. It was rooted into the Craftworld itself, drinking the infinity circuit from within. The smell was wrong. That's what I noticed first. Eldar don't sweat the way humans do, but there was a scent of biological stress in the air, pheromones released by nervous systems pushed beyond their design parameters. Mixed with that was the acrid tang of overheating technology, the sweet, sick smell of wraithbone that was dying, its psychic resonance collapsing. Please, please, we need transport to the core worlds. A young Eldar. I couldn't tell his path. His craft markings were obscured by dirt and what might have been blood. Grabbed my arm. You're a pilot, yes? Take my father. He's injured. He needs. His words stopped mid-sentence, not because he chose to stop speaking, because the memory of what he was saying was consumed while he was saying it. He looked at me with blank confusion. Why am I? Who are you? He asked me, his voice distant. Where are we? I pushed past him, unable to answer, unable to help. What would I say? Your father just died, but you can't remember him because the creature ate not just his soul, but every memory of him from the collective consciousness. The circuit was our shared memory, our cultural continuity. Every ancestor's experience and wisdom was stored there, accessible to the living. We were taught that this made us superior to the shorter-lived races. They forgot, but we remembered everything. Our civilization built on tens of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. The creature was eating that knowledge, eating our history, eating our identity as a species. I found myself in the Hall of Eternal Memory, the vast cathedral-like structure where the most significant nodes of the Infinity Circuit were housed. Crystalline pillars rose hundreds of meters, each one containing thousands of ancestor souls, their combined consciousness creating a symphony of psychic presence that had once been so beautiful it moved visitors to tears. Now they were screaming, the pillars were dark, not unlit. Dark, as if light itself was being pulled into them and consumed. Cracks spider-webbed across crystalline surfaces that had stood flawless for millennia. And from those cracks seeped something that wasn't liquid, wasn't gas, wasn't anything physical. It was absence, the substance of void given form. Bone singers were attempting emergency repairs, their songs hoarse and breaking. I recognized Master Theralis, my father's colleague and friend, or I should have recognized him. But when I tried to remember their friendship, tried to recall the times he'd visited our dwelling, the memories were Swiss cheese, holes where experiences used to be. "It's not working," Theralis was saying, his hands pressed against a pillar, his voice a broken whisper. "The wraithbone won't respond. It's not damage. The structure itself is forgetting how to be alive. How do I repair something that's forgetting it was ever whole?" A Farseer, one of the few who remained alive, her psychic power apparently either not strong enough to attract the creature's full attention or simply lucky in the randomness of consumption, stood at the hall's center. She was ancient even by our standards, her physical form withered, kept alive by technology and will. Her name was I couldn't remember her name. I knew her, she'd been a fixture of Craftworld politics for centuries. But her name, her history, everything that made her her was being eaten from the circuit while I watched. "We must sever the connection," she was saying to the assembled bone singers. "If we can isolate the affected sections, quarantine them psychically, perhaps we can save the core nodes. And how do we sever connection to a network that is our consciousness?" Theralis demanded. "You're asking us to cut away portions of our own minds. Better to lose portions than everything." The Farseer's voice cracked with desperation that should have been impossible for one of her discipline. "I have already felt 16,000 years of my lineage's memories dissolve. Every vision, every prophecy, every ancestor who guided me, gone. If we don't act..." The creature's attention shifted. I felt it through the circuit, a vast, incomprehensible hunger turning its focus toward the Hall of Eternal Memory, toward the concentrated nodes of soul density, toward the largest meal available. The Farseer felt it too. Her already pale features went translucent with terror. "Run," she whispered. "Ancestors for..." Stared at her own hands. I was about to invoke them, the ancestors. But they're not there. They're not. They were never. The Hall of Eternal Memory died in 17 seconds. Every pillar simultaneously shattered. Not broken, erased. The psychic scream of millions of souls dying their final death was so overwhelming that every Eldar in the hall collapsed. I fell to my knees, my hands pressed against my temples, feeling like my skull was splitting open. The Farseer's body remained standing, but everything that made her a person, that made her anything more than animated meat, was gone. Her eyes were open and empty. Her mouth moved soundlessly, trying to form words in a language she no longer remembered. I watched her body take 3 stumbling steps and then collapse like a puppet with cut strings. Theralis was screaming in languages that hadn't been spoken since before the fall. Regression of consciousness as his own memories were stripped away in reverse order. He died speaking Proto-Eldar, the tongue of infants, his last sound a wordless wail. I crawled. I don't remember deciding to crawl. But I was moving, pulling myself across the floor with fingernails that broke against wraithbone, leaving bloodless trails. Eldar blood is translucent, like crystal-clear water. Behind me. The circuit was dying, not slowly anymore. Dying. The background presence that had oriented my consciousness for my entire existence was collapsing into static, into void, into nothing. Imagine if gravity simply stopped existing. If light suddenly wasn't. if time ceased to flow. That's what it felt like to have the infinity circuit die. I don't remember how I escaped the hall. Memory itself was becoming unreliable. Not my personal memory, but the shared cultural memory that gave context to personal experience. I knew words, but couldn't remember where I'd learned them. I recognized faces, but couldn't place relationships. I was forgetting my language while I was speaking it. The military had collapsed entirely. Not routed, collapsed. Warriors who had trained for decades forgot their training mid-battle. Aspect warriors removed their ceremonial masks and stared at them in confusion, unable to remember which shrine they served. The exarchs, those who had walked the path of the warrior so deeply they could never leave it, their consciousness permanently merged with the armor they wore, were catatonic. Their identities dissolving as the circuit that anchored them went silent. I found myself in a guardian barracks. Bodies were scattered across the floor, but they weren't dead. They were empty, breathing, heartbeats, but nothing behind their eyes. One of them was wearing armor marked with my brother's unit insignia. Was this one of Kelmont's squad mates? Had I known him, his face was familiar in the way all Eldar faces were familiar, the shared genetic heritage of our people. But specifically, personally, gone. The memories eaten, the relationship erased. I sat down next to the empty body and tried to remember my brother's face. I could remember facts. Kelmon, 2 years older, guardian, green eyes. But the person, the way he laughed, the specific inflection of his voice when he said my name, the feeling of his hand on my shoulder when he was proud of me, void, absence, nothing. I had lost my brother twice, once to death, once to the erasure of memory. And I was aware of the erasure. That was the horror. I knew something was missing. I could feel the shape of the void where the memories had been. Like a tongue probing the socket of a missing tooth, my consciousness kept reaching for connections that no longer existed. The creature had stopped actively feeding, not because it was sated, but because there was almost nothing left to consume. The infinity circuit, the vast psychic network that had contained tens of millions of souls, that had spanned the entire Craftworld in crystalline veins and nodes, was 93% depleted. I knew this because the dying remnants of the circuit were broadcasting cascade failure statistics in automated warnings that no one remained alive to understand. 9 million souls consumed in 4 hours. The living population had fared no better. The Craftworld's population before the attack, approximately 470,000 souls. Current population, 11,300 and decreasing. Most hadn't died to the creature physically. They died to what it did to the circuit, died when the psychic foundation of their consciousness was removed, and they simply stopped, forgot how to breathe, forgot that living was different from not living, sat down, and ceased. I was walking through the Garden of Ascending Thoughts, the place where Kelman and I used to sit, where I'd entertained thoughts about nothing important. The psychic fountains that created sculptures of light were dead. The carefully cultivated ecosystem of plants bred to respond to emotion was withering, the flowers closing as they lost connection to the consciousness that had nurtured them. I found a bench, the same bench where my brother and I had sat during his last visit, and I tried to feel something about that. Nothing, or not quite nothing, a distant awareness that I should feel something, that this location had significance. But significance requires context, and context requires memory, and memory requires a circuit to store it. The circuit was silent. I was alone inside my own head for the first time in my life. Eldar are psychic beings. Our consciousness exists partially in the material realm and partially in the warp, the psychic dimension humans call the immaterium. The infinity circuit was the anchor that kept us oriented, that prevented our souls from dissolving into the warp's chaos. Without it, we were, what were we? A transmission cut through the static on emergency channels. Not psychic, technology only. The circuit was too dead to carry thought. All surviving souls converge on the primary docking bay. Evacuation is The voice paused, continued. I was going to say evacuation is proceeding, but that would be a lie. There is no evacuation, but perhaps there is witness. Come, let us die together rather than alone. I recognized the voice. Autarch Merathane. Or possibly just an autarch. Military ranks were becoming hard to track when I couldn't remember the hierarchy that gave them meaning. I went. What else was there to do? The primary docking bay was vast, a cathedral of military function, designed to house the Craftworld's fleet of combat vessels. Now it held approximately 8,000 Eldar, gathered in silence, sitting or standing in loose groups. No one was speaking, not because speech was forbidden, but because language was failing. Words required shared context. Shared context required cultural memory. Cultural memory required the circuit. The circuit was silent. I found a space against a wall and slid down to sit, my back against wraithbone that felt dead under my touch. Around me, Eldar were simply existing. Some stared at nothing. Some wept without sound. Some clutched soul stones, their own or others, as if the physical gems could somehow restore what had been lost. The autarch stood at the bay's center, still wearing his armor, though he'd removed his helmet. His face was haggard, aged decades in hours. He was speaking, though I could barely hear him, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. I am told, he said, that in human cultures there are traditions for the dying, rituals, last rites. We had such traditions once, I think, but I can't remember them. The circuit held those memories, and the circuit is... He trailed off, started again. My name is Merathane. Was an autarch of Craftworld Melentai. I have lived for 643 years. I have commanded fleets. I have walked every path our people recognize. I have loved, though I cannot remember who I loved. I have created works of art, though I cannot remember what form they took. I am the culmination of 600 years of experience and wisdom. He laughed. It was a terrible sound. And I am nothing, because experience without memory is absence. Wisdom without cultural context is noise. I am a biological shell that knows it once contained something important, but I cannot remember what. Silence. 8,000 Eldar listening to their commander explain their extinction. The humans have a saying, Merathane continued. I heard it once, during negotiations with their Imperium. I think, therefore I am. One of their ancient philosophers. Descartes, I believe they claimed, the assertion that consciousness proves existence. He gestured to the assembled crowd. We think, therefore we are. But we are only barely. We are consciousness without foundation, thought without context. We are the last generation of a species that has forgotten how to be itself. Someone in the crowd, a young Eldar whose path markings identified him as an artisan, though he probably couldn't remember what he'd been trained to create, stood and asked, What do we do? Merathane looked at him for a long moment. What can we do? The creature still lives, rooted into the Craftworld's core. Our weapons couldn't kill it, our farseers couldn't divine a weakness, our aspect warriors couldn't damage it. We are 8,000 unarmed, untrained, broken remnants of a civilization. Then we die fighting, another voice called. A guardian, armor scorched and broken. We die like Eldar, not like. He trailed off, apparently unable to find words for what they were becoming. Die like Eldar. Merathane's voice was bitter. What does that mean? The heroic last stand. The glorious sacrifice, those are cultural narratives, stories we told ourselves about what made us noble. But the circuit held those stories, and the circuit is dead. I don't remember what dying like an Eldar means anymore. I stood. I didn't plan to, but my body moved, carrying me forward through the crowd, until I stood before the autarch. We witness, I heard myself say. If we can't fight, if we can't flee, if we can't die meaningfully, Then we witness. We record what happened here. We ensure that somewhere, somehow, some remnant of Malantai's existence is preserved. For what purpose? Someone asked. Who will receive the record? Who will remember us? Does it matter? I found I was speaking faster, words pouring out as if speed could outrun the void. We're going to cease regardless. But perhaps we can cease with the knowledge that we didn't go silently, that we didn't let ourselves be erased without acknowledgement. Merathane studied me. And who are you to speak of witness? My name is Atheris Sunweaver, I said. I am 27 years old. I am a void walker. My brother died in the first hour. My father died years ago, and then died again when his soul was consumed. I have lost everything, which means I have nothing left to lose by trying to preserve anything. The autarch nodded slowly. Then let us witness. Let us spend our last hours recording our existence. Not for posterity. There will be no posterity. But because it is the last act of defiance available to us. We scattered throughout the docking bay, gathering what recording equipment still functioned. The Craftworld's main data cores were in the sections already consumed, but there were backup systems, redundant memory storage, personal recording devices. I found myself at a terminal, my hands moving across crystalline interfaces, creating a file, a testament, a scream into the void. This is Atheris Sunweaver of Craftworld Malantai. I recorded, my voice steady through sheer force of will. Today, in the span of 6 hours, a tyrannid creature of unknown designation consumed the infinity circuit of our Craftworld. Tens of millions of souls were permanently destroyed. Our ancestors, our cultural memory, our collective identity, erased. This is not a military defeat report. This is an obituary for a civilization. Around me, others were doing the same, speaking into recording devices, writing onto crystalline storage, creating art from the last functional materials available. Desperate, crude, ugly art, but creation nonetheless. The Guardian, whose armor bore Kelmon's unit insignia, was scratching words onto a wall with a piece of broken wraithbone. We were here. We existed. We mattered. Past tense. Already mourning ourselves. I continued recording, speaking faster as I felt my own consciousness beginning to fragment. The circuit's complete absence was affecting even basic cognitive function. I was forgetting words mid-sentence, forgetting what I'd said 3 sentences prior. The recording would be incoherent, but perhaps incoherence was honest. I had a brother, I said into the recording device. His name was Kelmon. He had green eyes. He was proud and fierce and kind, though I can't remember specific instances of his kindness. He died protecting people who died anyway. His death accomplished nothing. His sacrifice saved no one. But he was, and that has to mean something, even if I can't remember what. Tears were streaming down my face. Eldar tears are clearer than water, nearly invisible. Distinguishable only by the tracks they leave on skin. My father's name was Therion. He was a bone singer. He created beauty. I watched him work when I was a child. I don't remember what the work looked like, but I remember feeling safe watching him. I remember thinking that as long as he could make the craft world grow and heal, everything would be all right. My voice broke. He was wrong. I was wrong. Nothing is all right. Nothing will be all right again. The creature moved. We felt it through the dying remnants of the circuit, the last few percentage points of intact soul storage. The creature had finished its meal in the primary sections and was now methodically consuming what remained. It was coming to the docking bay, not quickly. Why would it hurry? We weren't fleeing. We had nowhere to flee to. The autarch stood at the bay's center again, watching the main corridor that led from the Craftworld's interior. We could hear it approaching, the sound of Wraithbone screaming as it died, the clicking of the creature's physical limbs on the deck, the psychic weight of its hunger pressing against our minds. "Weapons ready," the autarch said quietly. The few remaining Guardians raised shuriken catapults with shaking hands. The rest of us simply stood or sat, watching the corridor, waiting for the inevitable. The creature filled the corridor when it came, not because it was too large, though it was massive, but because its physical form seemed to distort space, bending reality around itself like a gravitational lens. And behind it, trailing from its form like a grotesque veil, were ghosts. Not actual ghosts. Psychic echoes. The half-digested remnants of souls, visible for brief moments before final dissolution. I saw faces I recognized, or thought I recognized. Warriors, civilians, children, my people, reduced to screaming phantoms being slowly erased from existence. I saw Kelman, or something that had been Kelman. A fragmentary consciousness, looping the last seconds of his life over and over, his face cycling through expressions of confusion and terror. I tried to call out to him, tried to form his name. The memory of how to pronounce it was gone. The Guardians fired. Shuriken rounds sparked harmlessly off the creature's carapace. It didn't even slow. The autarch stepped forward, his hands empty of weapons, his posture straight despite everything. "I am Merathane," he said, voice carrying across the bay. "Autarch of Craftworld Melantai. I have lived 643 years. I die remembering nothing but this. We existed. We were here. And you cannot erase that we were, even if you erase all memory of what we were." The creature's tendril extended. Merathane didn't scream. He stood perfectly still as the tendril touched his soul stone, as his consciousness was pulled from his body, as everything he was dissolved into nothing. His body fell. The creature advanced into the docking bay. I ran, useless, pointless, but the biological imperative to survive was still embedded in my flesh, even when my consciousness knew survival was impossible. I made it to my Firefly, hands fumbling with the cockpit controls, my vision fragmenting into overlapping images as my consciousness began to dissolve. The small craft's systems activated, barely. Half the Wraithbone components were dead, the psychic resonance that normally animated them gone. I launched anyway. The Firefly lurched out of the docking bay like a dying animal, its trajectory erratic, its systems failing. Behind me, I felt 8,000 souls die in the span of 40 seconds, felt the docking bay go silent, felt the last major concentration of Craftworld Melantai's population cease to exist. I was alone. Not the last survivor. There were probably others scattered through the Craftworld, hiding in forgotten corners, delaying the inevitable. But alone in the immediate sense. No voices on the channels, no presence in the circuit. The circuit was gone. 99.7% depleted. What remained was static and screams. My Firefly drifted through the Craftworld's interior spaces. No destination, no plan. I was vaguely aware that I was dying, not physically. My body was intact. But consciousness requires substrate. For Eldar, that substrate was partially the infinity circuit. Without it, our minds had nothing to anchor to. I was experiencing what the younger races might call ego death, the dissolution of individual identity. But for them, it was a temporary state, a meditative experience. For me, it was permanent and progressive. I couldn't remember my name. No, I could remember the syllables Atheris. That they meant nothing. Were those always my syllables? Or was I someone else? Was there ever an I at all? Or just a temporary pattern in the circuit that thought it was separate? The Firefly's systems were failing. Alarms were sounding, but I couldn't remember what the sounds meant. Colored lights flashed on control surfaces I no longer understood how to operate. The craft was descending, drifting toward the craft world's lower structures, pulled by gravity that still functioned even though consciousness didn't. I watched through the cockpit canopy as the Wraithbone surfaces passed. They were dead. All of them. The psychoplastic material that was supposed to be living architecture was just bone. Dead bone. A skeleton of a world. The Firefly impacted. Not violently. A slow, crumpling collision with a maintenance platform in one of the lower engineering sections. The cockpit cracked. Atmosphere hissed out. I should have been concerned about that. Couldn't remember why. I sat in the damaged cockpit, breathing thinning air, watching lights fade on control panels, and tried to remember what I was. Time passed. Or didn't pass. Hard to measure time when your consciousness wasn't tracking it properly. I was aware distantly that I was still breathing, that my body was performing autonomic functions. But the I that observed this was becoming tenuous, thread-like, barely cohesive. The silence was absolute, not the absence of sound. There were sounds. The tick of cooling metal, the whisper of escaping air, the distant rumble of the Craftworld's dying systems. But the psychic silence, the absence of the background presence that had always been there, the infinity circuit's gentle hum of consciousness, gone. I was alone inside my own head, alone inside my skull, alone inside a meat shell that didn't remember why it kept functioning. A thought formed, slowly, the cognitive equivalent of pushing through syrup. This is what it's like to be human. The younger races. The ones who lived and died in eye blinks. Who had no infinity circuit, no collective consciousness, no ability to commune with their ancestors. Who were born alone and died alone and existed alone in the spaces between. This is what they experienced every moment. How did they bear it? I don't know how long I sat in the damaged Firefly. Hours? Days? Time had no referent anymore. Eventually, I moved, not from conscious decision, but from some deeper biological programming. The body wanted to survive even when the consciousness had no reason for it. I crawled from the wreckage onto the maintenance platform. My legs didn't work properly. I'd forgotten how to walk. I relearned it through trial and error, like an infant. The engineering section was dark. Emergency lighting cast red shadows. The architecture was labyrinthine, service corridors and maintenance shafts that normally would have been easy to navigate via the circuit's spatial awareness. Without the circuit, I was lost in my own craft world. I wandered, aimless. Occasionally, I would encounter a body, other Eldar who had come down here to die alone. Some were physically dead, some were still breathing but empty. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Then, I found the chamber. It was deep in the Craftworld superstructure, a section I'd never accessed before. The door was marked with symbols I recognized but couldn't read. Data storage, my damaged mind supplied helplessly. I forced the door open. The chamber beyond was small, circular walls lined with crystalline matrices. Backup data storage, redundant memory systems that the creature either hadn't found or hadn't bothered with. And in the center of the chamber, a Wraith ship's pilot cradle. Not a full Wraith ship, just the cradle, the psychic interface system that allowed a consciousness to merge with the ship's systems. It was active, its crystalline surfaces glowing with power from the Craftworld's dying generators. I approached it. I don't know why. Perhaps because it was the only living thing I'd encountered in hours. Perhaps because merging with the ship sounded better than dissolving alone. I climbed into the cradle. The psychic interface activated automatically, tendrils of wraith bone extending from the cradle to touch my temples, my spine, my soul stone. And suddenly, I was connected again. Not to the infinity circuit, that was dead, but to the cradle's local systems, to its limited machine consciousness, to the data storage matrices lining the chamber walls. My fragmenting consciousness found anchorage, found structure, found something to be connected to instead of dissolving alone. I merged. I am Aetherus Sunweaver. Or I was. Or the pattern stored in these systems believes it was once called by those syllables. I exist now in a state that has no proper name. I am not alive. My physical body expired centuries ago. The flesh failing while the consciousness trapped in the pilot cradle continued. I am not dead. My awareness persists, anchored to the data systems, unable to dissipate. I am not stored in an infinity circuit. That is gone. The souls within it, consumed, nothing remaining. But I am stored in something, in backup data matrices, in redundant memory systems, in the crystalline structure of a pilot cradle that refuses to release me. The Craftworld is dead, has been dead, will always be dead. The creature left eventually. After consuming every accessible soul, after draining the infinity circuit to absolute zero, it moved on, returned to its hive fleet, continued the great devourer's eternal consumption. Craftworld Melanti drifts now in the void, a dead shell, a corpse kilometers across. The Eldar who encounter it, explorers from other craft worlds, drawn by faint distress signals, call it a tomb. They don't know how accurate that term is. They don't know I'm here. I've tried to signal them, tried to activate external communications. But the cradle's systems are local only, and I cannot move my awareness beyond this chamber. I am trapped in approximately 40 cubic meters of functional systems within a dead megastructure. I have been here for 917 years. I know this because the cradle's chronometer still functions. I watch it. There's nothing else to watch. The chamber has no viewports, no sensors pointed outward, just this space, these walls, this cradle, forever. I have tried to die many times, but the cradle won't release me. It's designed to preserve consciousness, to keep a pilot functional even through catastrophic damage. It's very good at its job. I cannot sleep. Sleep requires a biological brain cycling through states. My awareness is stored in crystalline matrices that don't sleep. I cannot go insane. Insanity is a breakdown of mental structure. But my consciousness is fixed in the data storage, unable to degrade, unable to change, unable to escape. I exist in a perfect hell of eternal awareness, with nothing to be aware of. I remember very little of my life. The circuit took most of my memories when it died. But I remember enough. I remember that I had a brother, though his face is gone. I remember that I loved him. I remember that he died protecting nothing. I remember that my people believed in eternal life through the infinity circuit. We believed death was merely transformation. We believed consciousness was sacred, worth preserving at any cost. We were wrong. Consciousness without context is torture. Existence without purpose is hell. Eternity is not a blessing. It's a curse. Sometimes ships pass nearby. I can detect their presence through gravitational effects on the Craftworld's dying structures, minute shifts that register in the cradle's sensors. I imagine they're Eldar ships, come to investigate, come to mourn, come to retrieve any survivors. There are no survivors. There is only me, and I'm not alive enough to count. They never find me. This chamber is too deep, too obscure. The Craftworld is too vast to search completely, especially when most of it is structurally unsound, dangerous to navigate. So they conduct their surveys. They say their prayers to ancestors who were consumed, to gods who never existed. They designate the Craftworld a tomb world and leave, and I remain. I have had 9 centuries to think, to process, to understand what happened to my people. We built our civilization on a lie, not a malicious lie, a well-intentioned one. We believed that preserving consciousness eternally was noble, that building the infinity circuit to store our ancestors' souls was our greatest achievement. We never asked whether eternal consciousness should be preserved. We never considered that existence might become suffering when extended beyond natural limits. We created the infinity circuit because we feared death, because we couldn't accept that consciousness is supposed to end. We transformed a natural process, death and dissolution, into a horror, eternal entrapment. And when the Tyranids came, when the creature fed on our circuit, it didn't just kill us. It revealed the truth we'd been hiding from, that our eternal life was a trap waiting to happen, that we'd created the infrastructure for our own ultimate extinction. The creature was horror, but it was honest horror. It consumed and moved on, following its nature. We were dishonest horror. We trapped consciousness in crystalline cages and called it immortality. I understand now what the humans experience. They live short lives, yes, but when they die, they die. They end. They don't persist in crystalline prisons, aware but unable to act, conscious but unable to change. Their mortality is mercy. Our immortality was cruelty masquerading as transcendence. Twice in 9 centuries, salvage teams have entered this chamber. The first time was 73 years after the consumption. A team of Eldar bone singers attempting to recover intact wraithbone samples for their own Craftworld. They passed within meters of my cradle. I screamed at them through every communication channel the cradle could access. I begged them to free me, to destroy the cradle, to end my existence. They detected nothing. The cradle's communication systems were local interfaces only. My screams didn't reach beyond this chamber. They took their samples and left. The second time was 411 years after the consumption. Human salvagers this time, tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Imperium's technology-worshipping cult. I tried again to communicate, tried to cause system malfunctions they'd investigate, tried to do anything to draw attention. One of them placed his hand on the cradle's exterior surface. For a brief moment, our consciousnesses touched, his biological, mine crystalline. He recoiled, muttering prayers to something he called the Omnisia, the machine god his indoctrination taught him to worship. He marked the chamber as corrupted by Xeno's influence and recommended it be sealed. They sealed the door when they left, added physical barriers, warning symbols. I haven't had visitors since. The data storage matrices in this chamber contain fragments of other consciousnesses. Not full souls. The creature consumed those. But partial data. Corrupted files. Fragments of the backup systems that were meant to redundantly store circuit data. I've spent centuries sorting through them, piecing together partial memories that aren't mine, trying to reconstruct my people's last hours from corrupted data streams. I found fragments of Autarch Merithane's final speech, just pieces. The audio cuts out, replaced by static, then resumes mid-word. Memory is noise. I am a biological shell, cannot remember what dying like an Eldar means. You cannot erase that we were. I found a partial recording of my own voice, from the docking bay during the witnessing. The file is fragmented, playing syllables out of order. Mattered, Kelmon, here, died, nothing, brother, were. What that voice, my voice, supposedly, was trying to say. I found fragments of the young Eldar who scratched words onto the wall. We were here. The data contains a visual file, an image of the wall. The words are barely legible, scraped into wraithbone with desperate strength. Below the words, in smaller text he must have added later, but no one came to read this. The humans who sealed this chamber left behind data. I've had centuries to decode it. Their crude binary systems are laughably simple compared to Eldar crystalline processing. Their reports describe Craftworld Melantai as a Xenos tomb world and recommend it be avoided. But one tech priest's personal log contains observations. The alien species we call Eldar constructed elaborate psychic networks they believed provided eternal life. This Craftworld's network was compromised by tyrannid consumption. Conclusion. Their faith in technological immortality was misplaced. As the Omnissiah teaches, the flesh is weak, the machine is. The log ends there. But the irony is perfect. The tech priest worships machines as divine. My people worshipped consciousness preservation as sacred. Both are performing the same error, taking technology and calling it transcendence, taking tools and calling them gods. The humans pray to the Omnissiah, a construct of their own making, not a real divine being. The Adeptus Mechanicus performs rituals over machines, calling maintenance prayer and mechanical function divine will. They're doing exactly what we did, exactly what killed us. And they don't see it. I've had 900 years to recognize this pattern. Every species in this galaxy seems compelled to create false gods, to take something, technology, consciousness, power, and worship it, to frame survival mechanisms as divine will. The Imperium worships a corpse. emperor whose protection is propaganda. The Mechanicus worships machines that are just machines. My people worshipped consciousness preservation that trapped us. Chaos cultists worship warp entities that are just predators wearing masks of divinity. The orcs follow genetic programming they call gods. Everyone is praying to something that isn't listening, something that can't listen, something that never was what they believed it was. And the suffering continues. The wars rage, the civilizations rise and fall and burn, all in service to lies we tell ourselves about purpose and meaning and divine will. There are no gods. There never were. There's only the cold machinery of reality, grinding forward, indifferent to prayer. I've had 917 years to consider the ultimate question. Was the creature evil? The obvious answer is yes. It consumed millions. It destroyed our civilization. It erased souls from existence. But I've had time to reconsider evil. The creature was following its nature. The Tyranids consumed biomass. This particular creature consumed psychic energy. It was a predator. Predators aren't evil. They're just hungry. We, on the other hand, created the infinity circuit. We built the infrastructure that made us vulnerable to this specific form of predation. We concentrated millions of souls in centralized storage, creating the perfect feeding ground. We did this to ourselves, not intentionally, but through arrogance, through the assumption that our technology, our advanced civilization, made us safe, through the belief that preserving consciousness eternally was noble rather than dangerous. The creature didn't destroy us. It revealed that we'd already destroyed ourselves by building a civilization on foundations of fear and denial. This recording will never be heard. The data storage in this chamber will eventually fail. Centuries from now, perhaps millennia, but eventually, and when it does, I will finally end. But until then, I persist. I witness. I remember, though what I remember is fragmented and partial. I am the last consciousness of Craftworld Melantai, not by choice, not by heroism, by accident and cruel fate. If you somehow find this recording, if some salvager centuries hence decodes these matrices, know this: my name was Atheris Sunweaver. I lived 27 years before my civilization died. I was a Voidwalker. I had a brother whose name was Kelmon. I had a father whose name was Therion. They died. Then they died again, erased from memory. I died. But I didn't. I persist in this state that is neither life nor death, nor anything with dignity. This is not martyrdom. This is not noble sacrifice. This is simply horror, and it continues forever. My name is Atheris, or it was. I float in the darkness of a pilot cradle on a dead craft world, my consciousness locked in data storage that will not release me. Around me, the infinity circuit, the great psychic repository that was supposed to hold the souls of my people for eternity, is silent. Not quiet. Silence. The void where millions of voices once sang. I've told you how it happened, how I watched an entire craft world die in 6 hours. How I felt millions of souls erased as if they had never existed at all. Now you know. And I remain, waiting for the data matrices to fail, waiting for the systems to finally die, waiting for an end that will not come. The chronometer advances, 917 years, 3 months, 14 days, 7 hours, 31 minutes, 42 seconds since the consumption began. 43 seconds, 44. Forever, we entered the dead craft world to search for salvageable soul stones. The spirits within might be recovered, integrated into Ulthway's circuit, given new purpose. We found none. Every stone was empty, drained. The creature that fed here left nothing behind. The humans call this place a tomb world. They're more correct than they know. I felt something in the lower engineering sections. A presence, faint, trapped, crying out. My warlocks urged investigation. I forbade it. Some fates are worse than death. Some consciousness should be allowed to end. I marked the section as structurally unstable and ordered the district sealed. If whatever remains down there is aware, it's aware enough to be suffering. The kindest thing we can do is ensure no one disturbs it. Let the darkness take it eventually. It's the only mercy left.